Let me begin with this. Dealing with a narcissistic personality is not a communication challenge. It's an energy challenge, because narcissistic people don't just take your time, your patience, or your attention. They take your emotional bandwidth. They drain your sense of clarity. They twist your reactions and make you feel responsible for things you didn't cause. And the biggest mistake people make is believing that narcissists can be handled the same way as emotionally mature people. They can't. You don't play chess with someone who refuses to follow the rules. So today I want to give you the smartest, calmest, most self-protective way to deal with narcissistic behavior, without losing your sanity, your confidence, or your sense of self. The first thing you need to understand is this: narcissists thrive on your emotional dependence. They want your admiration. They want your agreement. They want your reaction. Your emotions are their fuel, and your approval is their oxygen. The moment you stop needing their validation, their power collapses. They don't know what to do with someone who doesn't get destabilized by their moods, their threats, or their disappointments. You become unpredictable to them, and that terrifies them. So the first shift is internal. Detach from their approval. Detach from their disappointment. Detach from their praise. Detach from the idea that you can win them over with logic, love, or explanation. You can't. The more you try, the more they pull you into their emotional gravity. Next, let's talk about boundaries. Not the soft, polite ones that narcissists step over without hesitation. I'm talking about boundaries that are clear enough that even someone who thrives on confusion can understand them. Narcissists test limits constantly. They push, they guilt trip, they manipulate, they charm. But what they actually respect, even if they pretend not to, is enforcement. Not the explanation of a boundary, not the justification, not the paragraph behind it, just the enforcement. Here's what I allow, here's what I don't, here's what happens if you cross that line. You're not fighting them, you're not arguing, you're not giving a lecture about respect. You're simply creating consequences for behavior that harms your peace. And here's the part people get wrong. You don't have to raise your voice to be powerful. In fact, with narcissistic personalities, raising your voice makes you lose power. They feed off emotional noise. They want you reactive. They want you upset, because when you're emotional, they're in control. Your strength comes from neutrality, from responding, not reacting, from staying calm when they poke your insecurities, from being steady when they throw a tantrum disguised as an argument. Neutrality confuses them. It starves the behavior. It gives them nothing to work with. Now let's talk about communication. Specifically, communicating with someone who twists your words, shifts blame, and rewrites history as if you weren't standing right there. The only way to communicate with that kind of person is through facts-only language. Short, clear, unemotional. No metaphors, no explanations, no emotional vulnerability they can use against you. Just, this is what happened. This is what I'm doing next. This is what I'm not participating in. It prevents arguments from becoming mazes. It stops them from dragging you into emotional quicksand. It protects your clarity when they're trying to force confusion. But let me give you the most important part of this entire message. You do not have to stay accessible to someone who damages your emotional health. Distance is not punishment. Distance is not cruelty. Distance is protection. Limiting access to a narcissistic personality is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that you finally understand the difference between compassion and self-sacrifice. You can care about them without letting them control your life. You can understand them without letting them drain your energy. You can be kind without being exploited. Sometimes the strongest thing you can say is not a powerful sentence. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's space. Sometimes it's walking away from the cycle you've been stuck in for far too long. Because here's the truth people avoid. You cannot fix someone who thinks they are never wrong. You cannot heal someone who refuses to acknowledge their wounds. You cannot love someone into self-awareness. Narcissistic personalities grow only when they want to, not when you need them to. And your job is not to fix them. Your job is to protect you. Your job is to show up for yourself the way you wish they would show up for you. Your job is to stop shrinking just to keep the peace. Dealing with a narcissist is not about outsmarting them. It's about outgrowing the need for their approval and rediscovering the power of your own. Detaching from a narcissist's approval is one of the most freeing, powerful, self-respecting decisions you will ever make. But it does not start with confidence. It starts with clarity. You stop needing their validation the moment you finally understand how the entire dynamic works. Narcissistic personalities survive on emotional fuel, and that fuel comes from your reactions, your attention, your admiration, your fear of disappointing them, and your constant attempts to either impress them or avoid upsetting them. As long as you're emotionally dependent on how they feel about you, you're playing a game where they always hold the scoreboard. And the moment you detach from that approval, the moment you stop chasing their validation the way they expect you to, the entire power structure shifts. Narcissists love to position themselves as the judge, the one who decides if you are good enough, loyal enough, respectful enough, grateful enough. They create a world where you spend so much time trying to keep them satisfied that you forget to ask whether their approval should even matter. And that's the trap. Their praise feels like sunshine, and their disappointment feels like rejection that you need to fix. But the truth is, their approval is not about who you are. It's about how useful you are to them in that moment. Their validation is conditional, temporary, and always tied to your compliance. When you detach from needing it, you break a cycle they rely on to keep you emotionally tied to them. The reason detaching from their approval is so uncomfortable at first is because narcissists know exactly how to make you feel responsible for their moods. When they are upset, it becomes your fault. When they are disappointed, it becomes your job to fix it. When they are angry, they want you to absorb it silently. And over time, you develop a habit of checking their emotional temperature before you check your own. You start giving them the authority to decide how you should feel about yourself, your actions, your choices. Detachment is the process of taking that authority back. It begins with recognizing that their reactions are not accurate mirrors of your worth. Narcissists react based on whether something benefits them, not whether it's fair, true, or respectful. If you say no to something that crosses your boundaries, they may get angry, but that anger does not mean you're wrong. If you express a need, they may mock it, but that mockery does not mean your needs are invalid. If you stand up for yourself, they may accuse you of being dramatic or difficult, but that accusation does not define you. The moment you stop interpreting their reactions as truth, you begin to detach from their approval. Another piece of detachment is emotional neutrality. Narcissists expect you to react. They want you upset, confused, apologetic, or defensive. The more you react, the more control they feel. But detachment looks like calmness, not coldness, but steadiness. You're not trying to win them over. You're not trying to convince them. You're not trying to manage their emotions. You're simply not letting their behavior dictate your inner state. And this alone frustrates them more than any argument ever could. Because once you stop responding the way they expect, they lose access to the emotional buttons they used to press so easily. One of the hardest parts about detaching from their approval is breaking the belief that if you try hard enough, they'll eventually see your worth. This belief keeps people trapped in cycles of trying to impress, trying to explain, trying to earn respect that never comes. Narcissists don't suddenly wake up and think, you know what, this person deserves better. Their validation is transactional, and the transaction always costs you more than it gives. Detachment is understanding that no matter how perfectly you behave, they will always move the goalposts. They'll always redefine what enough means. They'll always twist the standard so that you're the one scrambling to keep up. So instead of chasing their approval, you learn to approve of yourself without letting their shifting opinions hold any weight. Detaching from their approval is also about reclaiming your internal compass. Narcissists want you confused because confusion makes you controllable. When you detach, you stop looking outward for direction and start looking inward. You honor your boundaries without needing them to agree. You acknowledge your feelings without needing them validated. You trust your judgment without asking for their permission. You make decisions based on your values, not their reactions. And for the first time, your self-worth comes from within, instead of from their shifting mood. The moment you detach psychologically, something powerful happens. You become immune to their manipulation. They try guilt. It doesn't work. They try gaslighting. You see through it. They try silent treatment. You feel peaceful instead of panicked. They try love bombing. You recognize it as a strategy, not sincerity. Detachment turns everything that used to control you into background noise. You gain clarity, strength, and emotional distance that they cannot reach. And that is what truly disarms a narcissistic personality. Not fighting harder, not shouting louder, but refusing to let their approval define your reality. Setting boundaries a narcissist cannot twist, distort, or confuse is one of the strongest forms of emotional protection you will ever give yourself, because clarity is the one thing manipulation cannot survive. Narcissistic personalities thrive in confusion. They rely on vague expectations, undefined agreements, and emotional gray areas where they can shift blame, deny their behavior, and rewrite reality. The less clear the dynamic is, the more control they gain. That's why when you begin setting boundaries that are specific, simple, and impossible to reinterpret, the entire power dynamic changes, not because they suddenly become respectful, but because you stop being someone they can easily manipulate. Clarity shuts every back door they use to re-enter the conversation with excuses. When a narcissist senses uncertainty in your words, they exploit it. If you say, "I don't really like it when you talk to me that way," they'll reply, "I was just joking." If you say, "I need more consistency," they'll say, "You're being dramatic." If you say, "That hurt my feelings," they'll say, "You're too sensitive." But when you say, "This behavior is not acceptable to me, and I will not engage when it happens," there is nothing for them to twist. You're no longer describing how you feel. You're defining what you will and will not allow. And that clarity is a shield, not because it changes them, but because it protects you from being pulled into circular conversations where they pretend not to understand. Narcissists often weaponize ambiguity. They pretend they didn't know, or weren't aware, or didn't mean it like that. They use confusion as a way to avoid accountability, and as soon as you start being direct, they lose the option to hide behind misinterpretation. Clear boundaries sound like, "If you raise your voice, I will leave the conversation. If you insult me, I will not respond. If you try to guilt trip me, I won't continue this discussion." Every boundary you set should have two parts: the behavior you're addressing and the action you will take. That's what stops manipulation. Because when a narcissist can no longer twist your words, they're forced to face the fact that you're serious. The challenge is that narcissists will always test clear boundaries. The first time you enforce one, they may punish you with anger. The second time, they may switch to guilt. The third time, they may act confused, as if your boundary appeared out of nowhere. This resistance is a sign that your clarity is working. Manipulative personalities push hardest when they sense you're breaking free from their influence. But your consistency is what gives your boundary strength. A boundary is not something you say once. It's something you uphold repeatedly, every single time they cross the line. Not to teach them a lesson, but to protect your own emotional stability. Clarity also prevents you from being pulled into emotional traps disguised as conversations. Narcissists are masters at shifting between topics, bringing up your past mistakes, or twisting the situation to make it seem like you're the problem. A clear boundary keeps you anchored. Instead of following them into emotional chaos, you return to one simple line. "This is the boundary. This is what I will do. You don't debate. You don't explain. You don't justify." Because the moment you start defending your boundary, you've already given them room to bend it. Boundaries are not discussions. They are decisions. Another important part of boundary clarity is removing emotional padding. When you sugarcoat a boundary, narcissists hear loopholes. If you say, "I don't want to upset you, but I really need a little more respect," they hear. If I get upset, they'll give in. If you say, "I'm trying to be fair, but that comment hurt me," they hear. If I argue enough, they'll drop it. Narcissists thrive on emotional hesitation. So boundaries must be expressed with calm neutrality. Not anger, not fear, not over-explaining. Just simple, direct statements that leave no room for interpretation. The real shift happens inside you. When you set clear boundaries, you stop asking the narcissist to change and start changing how you respond. You stop hoping they will finally respect your feelings and start protecting yourself whether they do or don't. The power of clarity is that it removes the narcissist's favorite weapon, emotional confusion. It creates a reality where you are no longer controlled by their reactions, guilt trips, or shifting narratives. You become someone they cannot easily pull into their games. In the end, clarity is more than communication. It is self-respect in action. Boundaries don't tell a narcissist how to behave. They tell you how you will behave when they don't. And when you stay committed to those boundaries without apology, without fear, and without needing their approval, you step out of the role they tried to assign you. You stop being someone they can shape, pressure, or confuse. You become grounded, steady, and untouchable. And that is when their manipulation loses all its power over you. Using facts only, communication is one of the most powerful ways to shut down manipulation, especially when dealing with someone who twists your words, rewrites history, or uses emotional tactics to control the narrative. When you remove emotional language and stick only to what is verifiable, observable, and undeniable, you take away their favorite weapon, confusion. Manipulative people thrive in emotional chaos because that is where they can distort, exaggerate, and redirect the conversation. They need you reactive so they can reshape the story to make you the problem and themselves the victim. But when you communicate strictly in facts, you deny them the space to perform that distortion. You keep the conversation grounded, clean, and impossible for them to twist into something else. Facts don't give them room to argue about your intentions. They don't give them leverage to guilt trip you, shame you, or pull you into emotional debates you didn't sign up for. Facts take away their power because facts don't change based on their mood or manipulative needs. For example, instead of saying you never listened to me, you say, when I was speaking earlier, you interrupted me 3 times. There's nothing to twist. Instead of saying you're being unfair, you say you agreed to this plan on Tuesday, and today you changed it without discussing it with me. The more precise, specific, and unreactive you are, the less space they have to maneuver. Manipulators want vagueness. They want emotional reactions. They want you flustered and defensive. They want to drag you into irrelevant details that lead you away from the original point. Facts-only communication shuts all of that down. It keeps the focus exactly where it needs to be, even if they try to redirect it. And trust me, they will try. They may accuse you of being cold, rude, dramatic, disrespectful, too logical, or too sensitive. Whatever angle they think will get you back into emotional territory. But that is precisely why facts are your shield. Their accusations bounce off because you're not debating interpretations. You're not debating feelings. You're not debating motives. You're stating what happened, what was said, what was done, and what needs to change. Facts also protect you from self-doubt. Manipulators rely heavily on gaslighting, and gaslighting doesn't work when you've been paying attention to the details. When you practice observing instead of emotionally absorbing, you stop questioning your own reality. You stop wondering whether you overreacted or misunderstood. You know what happened because you've trained your mind to track facts, not emotional chaos. This doesn't mean you suppress your feelings. It just means you don't use your feelings as the foundation of a discussion with someone who weaponizes them against you. Your feelings are valid, but facts keep the manipulator out of your psychological space. This communication style is simple, but it requires discipline. It means slowing down before you respond. It means not taking the bait when they try to provoke you into emotional reactions. It means answering with clarity instead of intensity. It means replacing, "I feel like you," with "yesterday at 6 p.m. you said." It means keeping your tone calm and your words clean. Manipulators can debate your emotions forever, but they can't debate the truth without exposing themselves. And here's the interesting thing. Once you start using facts only, you begin to see their patterns more clearly. You notice their contradictions. You notice the way they shift stories. You notice the deflection, the excuses, the sudden memory loss, the convenient confusion. And instead of getting pulled into their game, you stay steady. You begin to feel more in control, not of them, but of yourself. That's the real win. They can't twist what you didn't emotionally decorate. They can't distort what you kept simple. They can't claim you meant something else when you were clear, direct, and factual. This doesn't guarantee they will start behaving differently. Manipulation is a strategy they rely on, and many refuse to give it up. But it guarantees that you will stop being an easy target. You will stop being someone they can psychologically pull apart. You will stop letting them drag you into conversations where you walk away feeling confused or guilty for no reason. Using facts only, communication is not about winning arguments. It's about removing their ability to control the narrative. It's about protecting your emotional clarity. It's about refusing to participate in confusion. Facts give you strength. Facts give you stability. And facts give you freedom from their manipulation, because they no longer have access to the emotional hooks they once used to control you.